and the opportunity he might have. His last communication with me was he sent me a YouTube video of him winning a decathlon. The effort he displayed in each event just exemplified the effort he put into each race of his life. He was very emotional, and he didn't try to hide it. His stern-looking face did not express who he really was on the inside, a loving and compassionate man. I think the corny jokes he told and the cheek pinches were his way of staying connected to those he loved. I'm sure when he stepped into heaven, the Lord greeted him with, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Phil fought the good fight, he finished his race, and he kept the faith. I'm looking forward to be reunited with him in heaven.
So the phone would ring, and I would answer it, "Wake up and go to sleep." It's Unc. I called him Unc, or Uncle Phil. One of the besetting problems Uncle Phil had is he never grew up. One of the greatest things about him was that he never grew up. It was what we appreciated. I'm not sure if this is appropriate or not, but Aunt Debbie, I had a little category here in my note about, and Aunt Debbie, I think, covered a lot of this when she talked about her husband, but I know there's a lot of heartbreak, there's a lot of broken marriages, but I think it would be appropriate if we would give them, just give them a hand for staying together for 41 years. It's just a blessing. You know. It's an example of I know there's a lot of patience and forbearance, I knew you well enough to know that was a two-way street, and that's the way a marriage is. So go thou and do likewise. It's something that happens every day. I asked some of my sisters and mom and different ones about what they remember of Uncle Phil, and fierce loyalty and protectiveness. My sisters mentioned that. Somebody made a comment or something, and he was quick to, be on them about. He couldn't handle when people were sort of misused or talked wrong. But remember the time I think it was Jason got that three-wheel bike, got his foot in the thing. Uncle Phil just grabbed the spokes of that wheel and literally tore the spokes out of the wheel. That's how upset and aggressive he'd become when somebody that he loved was being in pain or somehow or hurt in some way. I know Jason mentioned a lot of memories about Dad and Uncle Phil, my dad. And it was interesting, the donut thing we were talking about, these little guys eating donuts. My grandfather, which would be Duff Scott, took me for donuts. So this is sort of a reciprocal, if that's one of my only memories, not only, but one of the strong ones is donuts must have a way to the heart. Yeah, exactly. Heart attacks. Not a strong point in our family. So, just to share a few things, I remember, of course, most of my experience was with seeing my dad and his brother relate to each other. And those two, their minds were right on the same thing, but the conversation could go from, some guy that lived in Beaver Creek when they were young, and he died maybe in Vietnam, and then this sparked some other thought, and it would go to this, and it would jump over decades and ages, and they would both land at the same place at the same time and take off in the conversation. You learn a lot hearing people like that when they're just talking together and going over things, and it's just, they were sort of brilliant in their own way about the kinds of facts and things they remembered and just the stuff that's stuck in their head is real statistical things. Just all the details would stick there. That was a privilege, probably part of my education more than I would realize. I don't have much formal education. I don't think Uncle Phil was ever seemed embarrassed at all that my dad looked Amish. It was never a thing. He wasn't that way with people. It just didn't matter what color your skin was, what you looked like, what your seemingly social or economic status was. He didn't seem to notice that a whole lot. A lot of our experiences growing up, we went to a lot of Indian mounds all over the place. We come out here and go to Indian mounds, Miamisburg Mound, and of course these conversations were going on the whole time, and it always took place, and we'd pile in Uncle Phil's car, and his car was always a wreck. I mean, you take sweaty workout clothes and bike wheels and, of course, an inner tube pump, maybe a gun wrapped in a blanket, French fries, and some action figures that Jason would have had when he was a little guy, all piled in this car. He spilled everything. It's just a disaster. So you'd have to sort of excavate the car a little bit so you could sit in the back seat. And so I'd get in there, and then we'd go all over the place, look at Indian mounds and whatever it was. When I was probably the age of my son Isaac or Noah, when Uncle Phil would come out here, and that was when he was probably in about the peak of the bicycle and the velodrome racing. So down behind Grammel's in the one development, there was this big circle, a road that went in a circle. It was about a mile. And we would go out there, and he would have me stand at one spot. He had lines painted on the road and have me time him on laps. And so I was just this little guy, and I'd stand there, and he said, okay, I'm going to go around once for warm-up, and then when I come back through, when I hit this line, you hit the stop. So he would go around, and when he'd come back through, I'd see him pouring it on, and he would cross that line, and then he'd just go all out. And then the next time he'd come around, he'd be breathing harder. The next time he'd come around, it'd be harder yet. Next time, the sweat is just pouring off of him. He's breathing hard. And he would just do that over and over and again. And I think now about what his heart was doing, when he was actually doing that. He was in pretty good shape at that point. And that left an impression on me as a young guy. It's just, I've always been interested in bikes. It didn't go so well for him when he tried to BMX race. One time he got this, I like to ride bikes and jump and stuff, and I think he wanted to try this, the BMX. He got this cruiser put together, and he tried racing somewhere out here. And he had a lot of power, but he didn't have so much bike handling finesse. And I think he was probably first one over the first jump, and then he crashed. And it got run over, and I remember him telling me people landing on him and all kinds of stuff. It was just not a good situation. An early memory is seeing Dad and Uncle Phil. They went on a canoe trip. And I remember, I was small enough at that point, I think I have a picture of me on somebody's shoulders. But I remember them, they had this canoe loaded on a station wagon. And they went off on this canoe trip, and it was a complete disaster. I mean, I don't know if they almost drowned. I know Uncle Phil lost his glasses, his favorite hat. They capsized, almost went into some dam or log jam or something. And I was with Grandpa going around to pick them up at the different, drop them off, pick them up, and it was quite an incident, I guess. But just a few stories about Boston, the antique bike deal in Boston. Somehow he found this deal. This old bike shop had went out of business years ago, and this guy had all these bike stuff in his basement. So Uncle Phil and Aunt Debbie rented this U-Haul or Ryder truck or something here in Ohio, drove to our place in Pennsylvania, and then Uncle Phil and Dad and I was sitting on a folding metal chair between the two front seats of this truck, and we headed for Boston probably in the evening. I think we drove all night, and it was sort of, I wasn't old enough to drive yet, but I was sitting there in this seat, and somewhere, probably 2 a.m. or something, Uncle Phil was reenacting Custer's Last Stand in the cab of this truck, and he was smashing an Indian skull with the butt of a gun, and he hit his elbow on the A-pillar on the Ryder truck, and that elbow, years later, he could still feel that spot. That's how hard he he hit it. And things were very real in his mind. His imagination was very vivid. And we just loved him for that. Also on that trip, I do remember, I didn't think of this, he remembers, I guess Dad and I were both sleeping, and he was driving sometime early hours in the morning. He said, I was getting sleepy, I was starting to wander. He goes, all of a sudden, I remember, what if I crash? What if I kill Steve and Andrew? What if I crash? He goes, and he started putting the visuals of what this accident would be like, and he used his imagination. He said, I was wide awake for the next 2 hours. He woke himself up with his own imagination. So that's a blessing too. Gettysburg. We went to Gettysburg one time, and we get out of the car, and we're looking at all these monuments close to Little Round Top and like Devil's Den in that area. Uncle Phil got out of the car and went down around this monument. I was with Dad. Just a short, we're reading about it. We walked down around the corner. There's Uncle Phil laying down there in some rock. He has his shirt off. He's laying there all bloody, has a stick laying across his chest like he's a dead soldier just laying there. It was very real, you know. He had to envision this, how this was going to be, and then he'd get up and sort of just think away. At the time of parting, you know, the more a person loves, the deeper they love, the harder the separations are. But I say, and I've said this before, that is a lot better than living at arm's length from everybody. I know the parting is hard, but when a person loves deeply, that tearing is all the more painful. Look at the Lord, our Savior, Christ. It's what he showed us. It's nothing new. Uncle Phil had some fears and uncertainties. He did, I know. For one time, at one point in his life, he talked a lot about Vietnam. I think he felt bad that a lot of his buddies were killed in Vietnam. People that he knew, I think he had a certain guilt here he was in college, you know, maybe wearing that very suit, and some of his friends he went to school with were dying in Vietnam. He talked a lot about, he maybe would joke about it to the point like, I just got back from Vietnam. And that was something I think he carried with him some. He was a real person. He wasn't a saint. He had things he wrestled with, like we all do. For one theme for a while was sausages. He talked an awful lot about sausages. I don't know where that one came from, but sausage was sausage everything. Everything was sausage. Yeah. Yeah. and then more recently here, I think he talked a lot about wearing Depends when he got old. And he was joking, but I think at the same time, he was afraid that he would make these jokes. I know my brother-in-law Nate told me about, because I'm going to be some old guy with a flannel robe, wearing Depends, dragging an IV pole through the snow, knocking on people's doors saying, anybody home, anybody home. Just he'd come up with these bizarre pictures that were he was so gifted at just painting. He could paint a picture, and he was usually involved with the person he's talking to, and he would pull things that he knew you would know, and he'd make this reference. And he's just so good at that. It was a gift. One quote was, "I feel like a Pop-Tart with shoes on." I don't know if anybody ever heard that. That was a good one. My last conversation with Uncle Phil, I was on a job up in Reading, PA, and he was driving a horse trailer down to Jason's. He's just driving down the road, and I was out in the water truck getting some water, and he was talking, and he was just struggling. He goes, "Is it right? Can you really feel?" He was just wrestling with some of the thoughts that we have sometimes, maybe revengeful thoughts or aggravating thoughts or just thoughts of anger towards maybe somebody or something. He was wrestling. Does the Lord forgive you for that? Is that right? Or are you saved if you have those thoughts? And we were having this conversation, and we didn't have time to really, dig into it as much. But that kind of wrestling is the kind of wrestling that we deal with. And he wasn't afraid to be honest and sincere about those kinds of things. And I just really, that's something I appreciated about him. It was just, he was spiritually awake and alive, and he could, we had that kind of relationship that we could dig into things. Now that one we never really put to rest. I'm sure it's not a big deal to him now anymore. It's been dealt with. Two things yet. Well, just my last, this seems a little, anyway. So we were, I think the last time you guys were out, we went to look for some bikes, out to PA. We went to look for some bikes, which we did a lot when you come occasionally. And we were all waiting down at the bottom driveway of our house in a truck, and Uncle Phil was in. I guess he was using the bathroom. I don't know. We were waiting on him. And there's sort of a hill there around the front yard that comes down. And we're sitting there in the truck looking out the windshield. And he comes down through the yard, and he sort of glanced sideways at us. He knew we were there looking in the truck. And he sort of just wanders past the front of the truck. It's sort of like he's looking around like this, sort of stumbling a little bit. And he has this big long tail of toilet paper hanging out of his pants. And we were supposed to see it. It was just, but that's just the way he was. And if it's not sacrilegious or disrespectful, I sort of picture that's the way he entered the kingdom. The stuff of earth, just sort of trailing behind all the embarrassment and the faults and failures and the dirtiness of life. We got to move on, and we're all going to get that call someday. It comes. I just want to finish with a poem composed by Uncle Phil. I think probably when at the time he was wearing that suit about. He wrote this. This is original poetry from Phil Scott. Why make your bed? Why make your bed? It's just a place to rest your head. It's not a mortal sin. It'll just get messed up again. Next time somebody tells me to make it, I'll just say, I can't take it.
I promise it's not all this long. Phil Scott. Who is Phil Scott? He was a son, a husband, a father, a brother, a friend, a coach, a neighbor. He was a man of God. But to me, he was just Uncle Phil. Uncle Phil has been a part of my life pretty much as long as I can remember. Ever since a young age, I can remember looking forward to the Farnsworth Thanksgivings. It meant seeing Grandma, Grandpa, aunts, uncles, cousins, and then there was Uncle Phil. Uncle Phil was one of those uncles he enjoyed seeing everyone, but I think he really enjoyed the nieces and nephews the most. Because anyone that knows Phil knows how easy it was for him to lower his maturity level to a kid's level. We would go out, we'd play football, we'd go biking, and I also remember swimming with him a couple times. He's the only guy I know that could do the triple long jump in the pool. Black Fridays always meant the women went shopping, and all of us men and boys made our annual trip to the Air Force Museum. This was always an adventure. It always seemed that my brother Dan, cousins Richard and Kevin, and Jason, and I, no doubt would end up with Uncle Phil. And it was never a dull moment. I'm surprised actually that we didn't get kicked out of there. He'd always be pretending to hit his head on a wing of an airplane, trip over chairs, or just jump out of somewhere and act like he was in Vietnam. We certainly were not quiet, and our laughter and immaturity is probably why Grandpa Farnsworth was so far behind reading every sign and plaque. Uncle Phil always had a joke. Some were good, but as many of you know, many of them were not. They were not really all that funny at all. But just watching Uncle Phil roll on the floor with laughter was always funny. One of his favorite words to describe someone always seemed to be cat. He'd be like, "Who's that cat? What's wrong with that cat?" Or a lot of times it was, "That cat's crazy." Well, as I started a life of my own, I didn't always make it out for the family Thanksgivings anymore, but I did still manage to make it out about once a year and visit Uncle Phil. He always stayed a part of my life. He'd make phone calls, see how I was doing, what I was up to. And in the recent years, we seem to keep a little more caught up on each other's lives through Facebook. And yes, every one of my 5 kids received what I called the Uncle Phil initiation into the family. They got the famous Phil cheek pinch. To me, Uncle Phil wasn't just an ordinary uncle. He was kind of an extraordinary uncle. What set him apart was his passion for the things that he loved. Track and field, bikes, talking about the Civil War, family, life, and most of all, Jesus Christ. And because of Uncle Phil's faith in Jesus, I know that he's in heaven and he's waiting for us to join him. And when we get there, I'm sure that he will give us that cheek pinch and he's going to say, "What's up, cat?" In closing, I'd like to read this poem. The poem is called Life. Life is but a stepping stone, a pause before we make it home, a simple place to rest and be until we reach eternity. Everyone has a life journey, a path to take with lots to see. God guides our steps along the way, but we were never meant to stay. Our final destination is a place filled with love, His majesty and grace. Today we celebrate the life of a loved one who has gone before us, the race he has won. His journey has now ended, and he is claiming the great reward with Jesus, our Lord.
Hello, I'm Greg Brewer. He always introduced me as his other son. He coached me in high school between the years of 98 and 2002. He always thought that I could do more events like the long jump, 400, 800. He wanted to throw me in every event. It's been about 20 years of jokes and talking loud to make sure he heard me. You always have to repeat yourself. Also, when we used to go out to eat, going out to eat with him was a venture because we always would eat real fast and then we would talk to everyone in the restaurant and treat everyone the same, to the busboy, to the manager. It would take them about 15 minutes to eat and then 2 hours for us to walk out. I always cherish these moments that we had. always call me and check up on me and make sure. And before we left, he would always make sure that he told me he loved me and gave me a big hug. I always cherish the moments to see him as a father and see him treat his family with I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Hello, hello.
Hello yourself. I'm Bob. I've known Phil for a long, long time, and I want you all to think about this. Phil had a photographic mind. I don't think you can all hear me. He had a photographic